I'm Lila, 25, a mechanic with salt crust in my hair, grease stain in my hands, living in a storm-swept Nova Scotia town where the sea hums dark secrets. I poured years into my family's crumbling seaside cottage, my paychecks propping up Margaret and Henry, while my sister Emma sprawled by the stove, her lazy sneer cutting deeper than the ocean's roar. Then I found their will, stashed in the attic like a jagged knife, leaving all to her, nothing for me, a scrawl claiming she needs it more. My heart splintered. I stopped the money and they turned vicious, smearing lies online, branding me a traitor. Worse still, Mark whispered, Emma's been lurking in the cellar, siphoning my cash. I flung the truth out, watched it surge like a tide, and broke free. My tale's a tempest of betrayal and rebirth. Ready to dive in? Join me. I woke to the Nova Scotia wind clawing at my flat, shaky windows, the salty sting of the Atlantic sneaking through as I tugged on my oil-smeared overalls. My hands throbbed from wrestling an engine yesterday, but I grabbed the grocery bags anyway, knowing Margaret and Henry expected me before the fog thickened. I trudged down the hill, sea mist soaking my jacket, and shoved open their cottage door, the air heavy with wood smoke and quiet demands. Margaret shuffled over, her voice raspy as she asked if I'd brought the cod, her eyes darting to the bags, while Henry hacked a cough from his chair, griping about the roof's latest leak. I dropped the groceries on the table, my fingers fumbling for the checkbook, and scratched out another mortgage payment, the ink bleeding as my savings shrank. Emma lounged by the wood stove, her phone buzzing, her voice chirping. Last night's party was wild, you should have seen it, as if I hadn't spent that summer skipping rent to cover their heat. I clenched my jaw, unpacking cans with sharp jerks, the sea's growl outside sinking with the twist in my gut, my youth seeping into their endless wants. Margaret muttered about the chill, Henry flicked the check with a grunt, and Emma's laugh scraped my nerves, her smirk flashing as she stretched, her ease a cold slap against my weariness. I remembered the winter I'd shivered in my flat, their stove blazing thanks to me, and the knot inside tightened, a tangle of duty I couldn't shake. I shoved the bags aside, the thud lost in the room's stale hush, and turned for the door, my boots grinding the splintered floor. The cottage reeked of damp rot and need, its walls whispering for more, pulling at my bones like the tide drags the shore. I stepped into the dusk, wind slicing my cheeks, and hauled myself back up the hill, the sea's rumble chasing me home. My flat waited, cramped with tools and the faint whiff of gasoline, a thin shield against their greedy hands, and I dropped onto the couch, the springs whining under me. I stared at the ceiling, waves crashing in my ears, and felt the burden sink deeper, a load I'd shouldered too long without a fight. My fingers curled around a wrench on the table, its cold bite grounding me, and I thought of the engines I tamed, the freedom they roared with if I could just cut loose. The cottage loomed in my mind, its peeling boards clawing at me, and I tasted salt, the ocean's call drowning their voices. I kicked off my boots, the damp chill in my feet, and squeezed the wrench harder, my knuckles whitening as I swore I'd find a way to break this chain. I perched in the attic of my parents' cottage, the Saturday sun piercing a filthy skylight, throwing fractured beams across the warped floor. Emma had slipped downstairs, muttering about coffee through a yawn, her footsteps fading as I tackled the mess alone, my hands sorting brittle tack stubs amid the musty haze. I nudged a rusted metal box, its latch stubborn until I pried it loose, a faint squeal breaking the stillness, and lift the lid, expecting junk, not a wampum shell. There it was, their will, stark and fresh, my name erased, every asset handed to Emma. A jagged scrawl in Margaret's hand, declaring she deserved it more. My heart lurched, the silence shattering, each word a barb sinking into my ribs. I slumped onto a crate, its edges gouging my legs, and scanned it again, disbelief curdling into rage as Emma's giggle floated up from below, carefree as a gull's cry. That blizzard I'd nearly tumbled off their roof, clinging to shingles to keep them dry, flashed in my mind, my sacrifice now dust under her smirk. The skylight dulled, clouds swallowing the light, and I felt the air constrict, my breath ragged. years of toil snapping like a brittle twig. Fury flared, a wildfire licking my veins, and I gripped the paper, my knuckles bleaching, the attic's moldy beams looming like bars. Gulls screeched outside, their calls knifing the quiet, and I wondered how long they'd schemed, how many times they'd pocketed my sweat while carving me out. My throat scorched, grief and anger colliding, and I jammed the will into my pocket, its corners jabbing my skin. I couldn't face them, not with this fracture splitting me open, so I rose, the box clanking shut, and braced against a post, its splintered wood pricking my hand. The sea thundered beyond, a relentless pulse, and I felt a rift quake inside, a chasm threatening to swallow me whole. I stumbled down the ladder, each step a hollow thump, Emma's chatter echoing below, and ducked out the back door, the wind snagging at my hair. I teetered on the cliff's brink, the will a stone against my thigh, the ocean's churn mirroring my turmoil as gulls wheeled overhead, mocking my blindness. I'd propped them up, bled for them, and they'd toss me aside, but I squared my shoulders, my spine stiffening like granite under the wave's assault. I wouldn't let this crush me, not now, and as the horizon blurred with mist, I vowed to claw my way out of their trap, the ground unsteady but my will unyielding. I slumped on my flat's-worn couch, the will's sharp corners jabbing my pocket, its sting a quiet roar that had simmered for a month. The Nova Scotia fog smothered my windows, a thick veil dulling the harbor's hum, but my thoughts raced, a jagged undertow pulling me under. I'd counted coins too many dawns, patched boats in icy squalls to float their cottage, and I was finished, my will crystallizing like ice on the quay, unyielding and clear. I snatched their grocery list, tore it into strips, and fed it to the fireplace. The flames licking it gone as I severed the cord, no checks, no footsteps to their door, my defiance a spark flaring bright. Time stretched, a taut hush, until Margaret's text buzzed my phone, her plea cutting, "We need the money, don't forsake us." I glared at the screen, its light pooling on the rug, my heartbeat sinking with the foghorn's mournful drone. Emma rang next, her voice coiling through. "You can't drop us like this, Lila. What's your deal?" And I saw her kicking the stove's base, whining in their kitchen, her greed a thorn twisting in my side. I rose, the floor groaning beneath me, and drifted to the window, fog curling like ash as I let her rant fade, unanswered, into the void. My face hovered in the glass, etched with weariness, but a fire smoldered below, a refusal to buckle again. The hearth hissed, swallowing their last claim. And I felt a chill sharp in the air, my stance firming like the dock's old pylons. I'd poured my days into them, mended their leaks, traded my future for their warmth, only to find a blade in my back. The foghorn keened, its wail weaving through the dusk, and I pressed my hand to the window's splintered edge, the cold biting my fingertips, a whisper of what I could claim. I wasn't their anchor, not at 25, not when I could still carve my own path. Margaret's words pulsed, Emma's nag clung, but I flicked the phone off, its glow dying as the fire spat a final ember. I eased back to the couch, the frame creaking, and watched the flames twist, their glow mirroring the steel rising in my core, a strength I'd buried too long. The fog swallowed the cliffs outside, a silent shroud, but I felt vivid, alive, their hold peeling away like blistered paint. I tugged a blanket over my lap, its rough weave grazing my hands, and tuned to the harbor's thrum, a steady beat drowning their echoes, anchoring my own. I'd propped them up, let their needs gnaw at me, but tonight I shed the leash, my palms open, my spirit lifting, a silent oath taking shape. I'd forged my own harbor, untouchable by their grasp. The fire dwindled, shadows stretching long, and I settled back, the fogs embraced tight, my breath even, my resolve a lighthouse cutting through the murk. I jolted awake to my phone's relentless buzz, the Nova Scotia dawn spilling through my curtains in frail bronze ribbons, a jittery light that pricked my nerves. I dodged their calls for weeks, let their whining drift into nothing, but this clamor pierced the stillness, a warning I couldn't shake. I snatched the phone, my fingers trembling as Margaret and Henry's post blazed on the town's online board, their accusation a raw wound. Our daughters abandoned us, left us shivering without coal or care. Emma's retort slashed below, her spite oozing, branding me cruel. A fraud, spinning my silence into betrayal as neighbors chimed in, their jabs a swarm of nettles. I clutched the couch arm, my chest searing, the room's hush splintering, fury and disgrace knotting like brambles in a gale. I lurched to my feet, my socks catching on jagged boards, their lies a chokehold I couldn't pry loose, my skin blazing with the sting of their gall. I'd nearly paced a trench in the floor when a knock rattled the frame and I exhaled, then saw Mark step in, his boots trailing pebbles from the strand, his gaze steady as he crossed the threshold. He met my eyes, his jaw tight, and murmured that Emma had been camped in the cottage cellar, siphoning cash I'd torn myself apart to earn, her greed a hammer blow to my ribs. I staggered back, the air thinning, envisioning her lounging amid moldy planks, guzzling my blood while they smeared me as the monster. The curtains quivered, a salty draft snaking through, and my legs faltered, their treachery a slab pinning me down. Mark steadied me, his grip firm, his voice a clear bell through the din. They'd rigged this game, all of them, and I could flip the table. I slumped into a chair, its frame groaning, and glared at the phone, its screen a venomous glare, their words writhing like eels I couldn't grasp. The harbor bells clanged, a somber toll, and I raked my nails across the table's gouged surface, rage swelling like a breaker on the shoals. I'd stitched their world together, surrendered my years, only to be branded the outcast, the leech, while Emma glutted on my wreckage. Mark hovered, his calm a tether in the maelstrom, and I felt a fracture split their mask, my will surging like a flare against the night. I wouldn't let their poison sink me, not when I clutched a truth keen as a whaler's hook. The bells pealed once more, their resonance threading the gloom, and I rose, my shadow looming tall, the heat in my marrow a torch I wouldn't quench. I'd been their pawn, their prop, but now I saw the board, and I'd make my move, not dance to their tune. The curtains swelled, salt pricking my lids, and I turned to Mark, my tone a taut wire, asking if he'd back me when I hit back. He dipped his chin, a spark in his stare, and I knew the tempest loomed, not just beyond my walls, but inside me, a fury they'd never brace for until it struck. I crouched over my kitchen table, the Nova Scotia dusk staining the sky in heavy violet, a brittle stillness cloaking my flat as I clutched my phone, its screen a void begging for my strike. Their deceit had gnawed at me too long, a poison I couldn't rinse out, and tonight I'd shatter it, my fingers poised. Then hammering the truth, the will's cold snub, my endless payments, Emma's cellar hoard, every buried shard I'd choke down. I hesitated, my pulse a frantic tattoo, my untouched tea cooling in its mug as I gauged the fallout, then pressed send, my post a torch igniting the gloom. The town's online board exploded, replies surging swift, a tempest of shock and fury shredding their tail, old Mrs. Tate dubbing them shameless as Margaret and Henry shrank to silence, Emma's excuses buckling under the onslaught. I rocked back my chair rasping the tiles, a quake rippling through my arms as release crashed in, a river burst in a frayed levee. I'd carried their lies, let them hollow me out, but now their charade lay in tatters, smashed by my trembling fist. The window shuddered, a squall hissing through the gaps, and I stumbled to it, gazing at the harbor lights twinkling like embers on a choppy tide, my breath clouding the glass. I yanked the will from my pocket, its folds brittle, and ripped it apart, the pieces drifting down like ash from a scorched branch I'd finally snapped. The town clamored on, voices I'd grown up with sharpening, their wrath a symphony surging through the digital haze, burying the kin I'd once clung to. My throat knotted, a cry rising, but I forced it down, tasting brine and liberty, my face in the glass no longer a wraith but a soul reborn. The harbor thrummed, its beat a quiet anthem, and I felt my frame lightening, their yoke melting like frost in a thaw. I'd been their beast, their echo, but this was my break-in, a split I'd forged with unsteady hands. The phone hummed, a flood of allies, neighbors, and forgotten mates knitting a shield I'd never sought, their praise a salve on scars I'd nursed alone. I dropped onto the couch, its weave chilling my legs, and peered at the ceiling, its fissures charting a path I'd escaped, a road I'd reclaim. The wind wailed outside, a fierce melody, and I let it sweep through me, my lungs filling with air unspoiled by their clutch. I'd bared their fraud, toppled their spire, and the wreckage was theirs to face, not mine. The harbor lights flared, a guide through the twilight, and I stretched, my limbs free, my heart pounding its own tune, unshackled at last. I'd propped up their sham stone by stone, but tonight I raised it, my truth a squall they couldn't weather, my future a slate I'd etch afresh. The night pressed close, the flats calm folding around me, and I kicked the wheel scraps aside, their scatter a final farewell as I leaned forward. The storm song a cradle, my spirit rising bold on its crest. I lingered in my flat's tight kitchen, the Nova Scotia dawn brushing the walls in pale gold, a tender hush threading through the air as I brewed coffee, its sharp aroma spiraling up like a breath I'd locked away too long. The phone sat mute, no buzz since midnight, their numbers severed with a swipe, Margaret and Henry's stillness a gulf I wouldn't span, Emma's vanishing a murmur I let drift. I'd cracked their lies wide open, watched the town torch them, and now they were gone, phantoms I'd exorcised with a shaky click. I gulped the brew, its sting biting my lips, and felt the chain break. A link rusted through, my grip firm for the first time in ages. I snatched my keys, their chill kissing my fingers, and drove past the cottage, its for sale sign tilting in the weeds, curtains flapping loose like tattered flags. A husk I rolled by without a flinch. The windows gaped empty, the shingles curled in decay, and I pressed the gas, tires kicking gravel in a gritty hymn to my unshackling, the sea's edge sprawling vast beyond the ridge. I swung into my lot, stones popping under the wheels, and stepped inside, the flat's air fresh, unspoiled by their ghosts, a haven hewn from my own steel. I flopped onto the couch, its coils humming low, and ran my thumb along the armrest's frayed weave, tracing a liberty I'd wrested back, shard by stubborn shard. The harbor sparkled outside, its surface gleaming like molten silver, and I felt my ribs widen, their shade peeling away like bark from a storm-split trunk. I'd been their scaffold, their quarry, but now I rose solo, unbroken, the marks they'd gouged a compass to something fiercer. The coffee cooled, its mug a steady ally, and I tilted back, the ceiling's knots a lattice sketching a life I'd seize. Stone by unburdened stone. The town had pivoted, their cries a current that swept the family off, and I released them, my pulse a rhythm no longer tied to their drum. I stood, the boards firm underfoot, and flung the window wide, a salty gust rushing in, its bite a cleansing rinse, stripping their grime from my bones. I'd borne them too long, let their load warp me, but now I cast them off. A rind I'd outstripped, my soul buoyant as the spray, dancing on the tide. The cottage's fate didn't snag me, its thread a stitch I'd snipped, and I spun from the view, my boots striking the floor. A cadence I'd crafted alone. I'd raised their house, plank by plank, but now I leveled it, my palms bare, my voice a melody unbound by their drag. The harbor shimmered, its sweep a reflection of my calm, and I reached out, my arms loose, my lungs gulping clean air, a sovereignty I'd bled to own. The dawn flared, the flat's edges aglow, and I strode to the counter, pouring another cup, its steam a vow curling high, my life a coast I'd map afresh. The sea purred beyond, a peace I'd claimed, and I squared my shoulders, their void a treasure, my roots sinking deep into earth they couldn't reach. I propped myself against my workbench, the Nova Scotia noon flooding the shed in vivid saffron beams, a fierce brightness dancing over tools I'd strewn while coaxing a boat's engine back to life. Months had rolled past since I'd raised their falsehoods, my savings pooling like a spring after thaw, my flat now stitched with repairs, each screw a mark of my own forging. Mark hovered close, 24 and resolute, his chuckle a warm undertow as he tossed me a wrench, saying, "Look solid now." Our banter a braid I hadn't planned but cherished, a quiet anchor in the space I'd claimed. I tightened a bolt, its squeal a cheer under my twist, and flashed a grin, a glow kindling in my core, a delight I'd thought lost to their grip. I flicked the wrench aside, its clatter a spark on the concrete, and stepped to the door, the harbor unfurling beyond, its waves glinting like molten quartz, my silhouette in its shine a woman unbound, my roots plunged firm in ground I'd sown. I'd learned trust was a seed I'd scatter wisely, a prize for those who stood with me, not a well I'd drain for their damp cellar's gloom. The cottage blurred to a wisp, its sail a wavelet I'd ignored, Emma a flicker I'd let fade, their void a scroll wiped bare. I brushed sweat from my temple at its salt a medal of work I'd picked, and glanced at Merc, his gaze snagging the sun, a reflection of the calm I'd seized. The shed thrummed, its air ripe with grease and potential, and I felt my pace quicken, my hours a quilt I'd stitch free of their tangles. The sea sang on, its cadence a hymn to my ease, and I planted my hands on my hips, the brine's nip a pledge I'd honor, to rise, to hold, to trust by my measure. Mark trailed me out, his step syncing with mine, and I beamed, my heart a torch blazing fresh, the burden of their sagging roof now a breeze propelling me upward. The horizon called, a page unblemished, and I strode toward it, my boots crisp on the earth, my spirit a lantern charting its own dawn. I've clawed my way from their shadow, from lugging their cottage's weight, to torching their lies in a blaze that freed me. And here's the truth I've forged. Trust isn't a rope to choke you. It's a spark I kindled from their ashes, shared only with those who hoist me up, not yank me low. I shed their load, rooted myself in Nova Scotia's salty gusts, and found freedom when I staked my faith in me first. Mark's steady grin lit the way, but I built this harbor, bolt by bolt, dawn by dawn. What about you? Ever borne a family's burden too long, or sliced a knot to breathe again? I'm eager for your tales. Spill them below. Let's trade embers from our own storms. Can't wait to hear your voices next time, so I'll see you soon, sketching my path under this wide, wild sky.